So imagine for a second that you're standing right on the edge of a massive, life-changing promise. You've faced down giant kings, you've survived incredibly difficult terrain, and you are literally steps away from the finish line. And then, you're told you can never cross it. Today we're diving deep into an ancient text that is absolutely packed with epic battles, really specific geographical borders, and honestly one of the most heartbreaking leadership transitions in all of history.
Welcome to the Padish channel. Today we explain Deuteronomy chapter 3 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, context in the battle. Second, defeating Og of Bashan. Third, dividing the conquered land. Fourth, solidarity across the Jordan. Fifth, Moses pleads with God. And finally, number 6, lessons and chapter recap.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, context and the battle. We're looking at Deuteronomy 3, verses 1 through 11.
So we pick right up with the Israelites exactly where they were. They've just turned up the road, marching toward a region called Bashan. And out of nowhere, King Og of Bashan marches out with his people to meet them head-on in battle, at a place called Edrei. Now what's genuinely fascinating here is just how incredibly specific the ancient text gets about the geography. We're talking about territory that lies east of the Jordan River. It stretches all the way from the Arnon Gorge up north to Mount Hermon. And as a cool little historical detail, the text mentions that the Sidonians actually called Mount Hermon Sirion, while the Amorites called it Senir. In this battle, the Israelites capture all the towns on the plateau, pushing right into the very heart of Og's kingdom.
Now, to really grasp what's happening, it's absolutely crucial to understand who this enemy actually is. King Og of Bashan, he isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill monarch. The text explicitly tells us that he was the last of the remnant of the Rephaites. If you look throughout earlier historical accounts, the Rephaites, or the Rephaim, are consistently described as a historically formidable giant people. So this really highlights the absolute magnitude of the Israelites' victory at Edrei. They aren't just fighting a regular army, they are literally facing down the last great titan of this entire region.
And the text brilliantly illustrates exactly how massive King Og was by giving us the actual dimensions of his bed, just as physical proof of his giant stature. His bedstead was made entirely of iron, and get this, it was over 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Or, if we're using the traditional text measurements, it was 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in breadth, using the standard cubit of a man. This colossal iron bed was actually kept in Rabbah of the Ammonites as a physical monument to just how immense this guy was. I mean, just imagine the psychological terror of facing a king who requires an iron bed over 13 feet long. No way you'd go into that battle without some serious hesitation.
But right in the middle of this terrifying setup, look at God's immediate reassurance to Moses in verse 2. God says, "Do not be afraid of him, for I have handed him over to you with his whole army and his land." God tells Moses to do to Og exactly what he did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites who reigned in Heshbon. And the text lays out the stark, harsh reality of this ancient victory. The Israelites utterly destroyed the cities, just as they had done to Sihon. But there is a really key distinction here regarding the spoils of war. The text specifically notes that all the livestock and the plunder from these cities, the Israelites carried that off and kept it for themselves.
Moving right along to section 2, dividing the conquered land. This covers Deuteronomy 3, verses 12 through 17.
Okay, so the battle is won, King Og is completely defeated, and now Moses has to systematically divide up this vast, highly fertile territory. And this isn't some chaotic free-for-all, it's a very highly structured allocation. Moses gives the Reubenites and the Gadites the territory starting north of Aroer by the Arnon Gorge. That includes half of the hill country of Gilead, complete with all its surrounding towns. Then, the rest of Gilead, along with all of Bashan, which, remember, was the entirety of King Og's former kingdom, is given to the half-tribe of Manasseh. And right here, the text reminds us again that this whole region of Argob and Bashan used to be known as the land of those giant Rephaites.
Let's zoom in on the half-tribe of Manasseh for just a second, because the text gets super specific about two descendants in particular, Jair and Machir. Jair, who is a descendant of Manasseh, took the entire region of Argob and he pushed his borders all the way to the Geshurites and the Maccathites. He actually renamed the region after himself, which is why Bashan became known as Havoth Jair. Meanwhile, Moses specifically gave the territory of Gilead to Machir. What we're seeing here is how specific families within these larger tribes were laying down foundational, lasting roots in these newly conquered spaces.
Now, you know how property disputes go, right? To avoid any of that kind of mess later on, Moses defines the precise geographical boundaries for Reuben and Gad. It is very meticulous.
The southern border runs right down the middle of the Arnon Gorge. Then it extends eastward all the way out to the Jabbok River. Now that river serves as a hard border with the Ammonites, and remember, the Ammonites were a people the Israelites were previously commanded not to provoke. Then, the western border is distinctly marked by the Jordan River and the Arabah, stretching from Kinnereth all the way down to the Sea of the Arabah, which is also known as the Salt Sea, right below the slopes of Pisgah.
Which brings us to Section 3, Solidarity Across the Jordan, covering verses 18 through 22.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The land has been all divided up, sure, but Moses issues a very serious, non-negotiable condition to Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. They cannot just sit back in their new homes while the rest of Israel is still out there fighting. Moses commands that all their able-bodied men must cross over the Jordan River ahead of their brothers, fully armed for battle. However, there is a lot of compassion built into this command too. Moses explicitly states that their wives, their children, and their large flocks of livestock can remain safely behind in the fortified towns they've just taken over. They stay safe until God gives rest to everyone. Only after the whole job is done can these men return to their eastern possessions.
And then we get this incredibly powerful moment of passing the torch. Moses turns his full attention to Joshua, his successor. He commands Joshua directly, saying, "You have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going." He looks right at him and says, "Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you." Moses is using this very recent history, the total defeat of Sihon and this giant King Og, as absolute, undeniable proof to fortify Joshua's courage for all the battles that still lie ahead across the Jordan.
All right, Section 4, Moses pleads with God. This is verses 23 through 29.
We are now at what is literally the emotional climax of the whole chapter. We completely shift gears from the grand, sweeping scale of marching armies and giant beds to this incredibly intimate, deeply heartbreaking prayer. Moses, after wandering for 40 years in the wilderness, makes one final, desperate request. He begins by acknowledging God's ultimate power, saying, "O sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do?" And then he asks for the one thing he wants most in the world. Read this slowly. "Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon." It is just such a profoundly human moment. After a literal lifetime of struggle and leadership, he just wants to cross that river and see the culmination of his life's work.
But wow, God's response here is just absolutely definitive, stern, and final. Moses explains to the people, "But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me." God tells him directly, "That is enough. Do not speak to me any more about this matter." It is a staggering denial. Moses is told in no uncertain terms that his journey ends on the east side of the river. Full stop. The text notes that God's anger with Moses was on account of the Israelites and their past rebellions in the desert, and that really cements this harsh reality that a leader often bears the heavy consequences of his people's actions.
Well, there is a compromise of sorts. Moses cannot cross the Jordan, but he is given a command to at least witness the promise. God tells him to go up to the very top of Mount Pisgah, and from that elevated vantage point, he is instructed to look out in all four directions: west, north, south, and east. God says, "Look at the land with your own eyes, since you are not going to cross this Jordan." So Moses gets to see the geographic reality of the promise fulfilled, even though his feet will never actually touch the soil of that western hill country. So with that door firmly shut on Moses entering the land, the focus has to immediately pivot to the future. God outlines 3 very specific steps Moses must take to prepare his successor. He must commission Joshua, encourage him, and strengthen him. Why? Because as God states, Joshua will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see. Think about how hard that must have been. Moses has to completely set aside his own personal disappointment to ensure the community succeeds under this new leadership. The historical narrative of this chapter then concludes simply by noting their current holding pattern, stating, "So we stayed in the valley near Beth Peor."
And that leads us to Section 5, Lessons and Chapter Recap.
So we've walked step by step through the plain meaning of the text. But what does this ancient account mean for us today? Let's pull out 2 massive practical life applications. Number 1, keep community commitments. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh received their inheritance early, right? But they couldn't just clock out. They were required to pick up their weapons and fight for the rest of their brothers. It teaches us that true success isn't just about securing your own comfort, it's about honoring your responsibility to the wider community. And number 2, accept limitations gracefully.
Moses, arguably the greatest prophet, was told a flat no by God. He was given a definitive boundary. Yet instead of becoming paralyzed by bitterness or throwing a fit, he obeyed God's command. He climbed Pisgah, viewed the land, and poured whatever energy he had left into setting Joshua up for success.
All right, to really lock this into our memories, let's do a quick, succinct recap of the whole chapter. We saw the Israelites march up to Bashan and achieve a truly massive victory over King Og, capturing the remnants of the giant Rephathites. From there, we trace the exact geographic division of those conquered eastern lands among the Reubenites, Gadites, and a half-tribe of Manasseh. We discussed the ethical call for tribal solidarity, where the armed men had to cross the Jordan while their families stayed safe. And finally, we ended with the heartbreaking reality of Moses' denial to enter the Promised Land, which led directly to the passing of the torch to Joshua near Beth Peor.
Before we wrap up, I really want to leave you with something to think about, inspired by the final verses we just looked at. Moses begged for the one thing he wanted most in the universe, and the answer was a firm no. It really forces us to ask ourselves, how do we respond when our own deepest, most earnest requests are denied? Do we shut down? Or do we, like Moses, look at the view we are given from the mountain, accept the reality of the situation, and focus on encouraging the next person in line? It's a profound reflection on acceptance, faith, and the true nature of what it means to be a leader.
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.